Okay. All right. I'll start off by telling everyone, folks, thank you so much. This is the interesting split between Mountain Standard Time, Mountain Direct Time has snuck up on us when we set it up within Mountain Standard Time. When we're using Mountain Direct Time on a lot of our schedule. For the remainder of this week, it will be Mountain Direct Time. And for next week, it'll be Mountain Standard Time once we change over this weekend. So it's good to see everyone. So just a quick welcome then. Starting off with, I don't have a formalized gavel to sit here. Instead, with the virtual gavel strike, I now start the 2021 AIMHO Annual Conference. This conference has been planning for a long time now, and I want to recognize all the efforts that went into the creation of this time together. I especially want to thank Brian Moffitt, Michelle Barnett for the dedication to getting all of this put together, Richard Workman for keeping us on budget, Jason Langston for all the Institute work that's about to come, Mike Schilling and Taylor Dixon for the DEI work we're about to embark, Jessa Velasquez and Jamie Lloyd for marketing the conference on social media, Letha Parrett for amazing sessions that we're about to participate, and Luke for keeping us on this tremendous tech work, and many others that are working behind the scenes. Though we all wish we could be sitting together, I hope gathering in Billings, Montana in 1 year will hopefully be enough to look forward to. I officially welcome you to the first day of the conference and proudly introduce you to Brian and Michelle, your conference chairs. Please join me on the stage, Brian and Michelle.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to AIMHO 2021. Michelle and I are really excited to welcome you into our space today, wherever you're at, whether that is the elementary school drop-off line, or you're at home, maybe your favorite cafe. Welcome to AIMHO 2021 experience. Today, here and now, I invite you to think about the moments that have passed and occurred that brought us together to this point. I want us to think about the voices, experiences, and events that have transpired that impact the spaces we inhabit. I invite you to reflect deeply for the next few minutes as we acknowledge the land of our region upon which our institutions are situated and the labor that has built those institutions as well. Recognizing that each of our institutions embody complex histories and experiences of a myriad of peoples that to this day go unnoticed and unheard. The Association of Intermountain Housing Officers, AIMHO, acknowledges that the region we represent, Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming, and Saskatchewan, Canada, is the traditional Aboriginal homelands of numerous indigenous peoples. We recognize, respect, and honor those indigenous peoples who are the traditional stewards of this land and all aspects of the environment. We further acknowledge that this enduring relationship with their traditional territories continues to this day. We wish to express our gratitude and appreciation of their persevering to protect this land for future generations and populations. The erasure of the relationship between those peoples and their traditional homelands is an insidious form of ongoing colonization, and we need to build our mindfulness of this and other indigenous protocols. In addition, we recognize enslaved people, primarily indigenous and/or African descent, likely provided exploited labor on which many of our universities have been built and were subsequently denied the education offered by our institutions. It is upon this colonized land and exploited labor that we are afforded the privilege of learning and working today.
As we move forward in our collective work, acknowledging the land and labor is vital. It is imperative that we remember our responsibility to those who were here before us, to honor their erased legacies, and call attention to and interrupt the exploitation as often as possible through our practice. We do so with the understanding that stating this acknowledgement is only a first step to establishing social justice. I ask that we continue to recognize and understand impacts of the past, the history of the land, and our history as a society and community, so we can create the future that we desire with respect and dignity for all peoples.
Thank you for joining us in that land and labor acknowledgement. We officially are welcoming you to the AIMHO 2021 Professional Peaks and Virtual Valleys Conference. This 2021 conference theme embodies the experience of members of our region through the past year and a half. Pandemics have challenged our profession to shift in so many directions as we continue to navigate best ways to support our students and staffs in such difficult circumstances. While the end may be near, so we hope, we are not underestimating the unknown ripple effects that are certain to come. We recognize that COVID-19 is only one part of the challenge as our profession continues to feel the aftershocks of the multiple pandemics that face our nation and our world. The lessons have existed in the highs, which we recognize as the peaks, and also in the lows, which we recognize in our conference theme as the valleys. And it is our hope that the 2021 conference experience will provide an opportunity for you all to reflect and share your triumphs, your challenges, and embrace the opportunity to center progress and hope in our work to come. At this time, I'll kick it over to Michelle to talk about our 2-week conference experience.
Thanks, Brian. So as you can see, the structure is a little bit different, might be a little bit crazy, but we're giving it a try. The reason is we wanted something that was practical and reasonable for us in this time. So what do I mean by that? Many of us are still wearing multiple hats. Some of us are still playing COVID coordinators or having a lot to do with that piece of things. And I think a lot of us are also dealing with vacancies. So we wanted to provide a structure that would allow folks to actually hop in and hop out however they need to. So for whatever that, that's going to look different from person A to person B, and that's totally fine. So we do not want this conference to cause any additional stress in anyone's lives, especially in the workplace. So traditionally we were, at a location and we could be with each other in the same room. And oftentimes, once we got back to our home locations, we would have to play catch up from being at the conference for several days. Our hope was to not have to have folks play catch up and to just do a couple hours each day and still be able to get in the rest of their work. So please do what works for you. We obviously want as many people at as many things as they can come to, but we do understand that not every single session might work for you. So make it work for you. And thank you again for joining us.
Brian, Michelle, thank you. I'd now like to welcome Sam Dalton, who's the IACUR Regional Director, to the chair or to the stage, please.
I'm not sure you're able to hear me, but I hope you can, or see me, but I hope you can hear me. I want to say thank you all for having me in your space today. I'm very excited to get to engage with you all and share a little bit about the exciting work that's happening in the Intermountain in a couple of days. I acknowledge how much hard work that all of you put into the experiences for our students, and I hope that I can communicate the great things that you all have done for our students as we connect with them in another 2 weeks at our annual conference as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sam. Now I'd like to welcome Dr. Stephen Jenkins, the Northwest AIMHO president, to the stage.
Good morning. Thank you, Todd, and thank you, AIMHO, for welcoming me as the Northwest AIMHO president to your conference. I'm pleased to be here as a representative of Northwest AIMHO and the long and warm affiliation between our two associations. I'm excited to offer you warm and friendly greetings from Northwest AIMHO and its 44 member institutions in 3 states and 2 Canadian provinces. As it has been for you, I'm sure, it's been an interesting couple of years for our member institutions and association. Certainly, we've all experienced the multiple pandemics. Our institutions are experiencing enrollments both very high as well as very low. We're experiencing exhaustion and trying to figure out how to balance all of our roles. And given that, trying to find the ways that engage our membership without adding more to their plates. As you, and I know AIMHO is doing the same thing as you experience this conference today and the next 2 weeks. And also being professionals in a people-driven profession, learning how to create cultures of inclusion and belonging through small video windows on a screen. But that hasn't stopped us from continuing our work. Over the past year, we've still accomplished a great deal. Northwest ACUHO held its own virtual conference in February of 2021, hosting over 250 registrants and over 30 educational programs. We have sponsored multiple scholarships for institutions and members to attend virtual trainings, roundtables, and conferences to support folks when institutional resources are scarce. We have focused our efforts on discerning what our association's role in developing greater diversity and inclusion in our association's practices look like. We have spent significant time working on a board restructure proposal that is now out for vote with our senior housing officers in our region. This restructure, we believe, will align our structure with our vision and values by realigning our 5 state and provincial representatives into 2 director positions, U.S. Membership Director and Canadian Membership Director, and creating a new director position whose work will focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and growing those capacities both internally for our association leadership and externally for our membership. And last, but certainly not least, we are deep into our planning for our own virtual regional conference to be held the first 3 days of March in 2022. As Northwest ACUHO and AIMHO have an affiliation agreement, that means that as members of AIMHO, you can attend our conference at the member rate, which will be $0 for the virtual experience. We'll communicate details in the coming weeks about how to register. And we are also planning for an in-person experience once again in Calgary, Alberta, Canada in early 2023. And welcome all who would like to join us to do so in Calgary. I want to wish each of you a wonderful and fulfilling conference experience, and many thanks to Todd and your AIMHO leadership for the invitation today. Have a fantastic day and go AIMHO.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Appreciate that. I'd now like to welcome to the stage for the ACUHO president, Dr. Peter Galloway. Thank you for your patience as we it's nowhere near as fluent to be able to actually look somebody in the face as they're coming to the stage and walking back away. So I appreciate everyone's patience as we welcome Peter to the stage.
I think I'm finally here. So good morning, everybody. On behalf of my executive board colleagues at ACUHO, and specifically Julie Laos, who's the regional affiliations director, Mary De Niro, who's our CEO, and the home office staff, as well as all the volunteers that participate in ACUHO activities, I bring you greetings from ACUHO. It's great to be here with your conference in this virtual format, and I appreciate the fact that you're all taking the time out of your very busy schedules on your campuses and in your personal lives for this professional development opportunity. As has already been mentioned, it has certainly been a pretty difficult year and a half for all of us individually on our campuses and our associations. Substantial shifts in our normal activities, showing concern for our students and colleagues that are directly impacted by what has been going on in business as anything but usual in our day-to-day lives. But there's also been some great opportunities that have presented themselves, particularly to connect virtually. So, and this is one example of that. Just a few highlights very quickly about what's going on in ACUHO. We started a new strategic plan as of January 2021. We started it before COVID kicked in, but finished it up during that period. So It went from a 5-year plan to a 3-year plan because we knew we needed to continue to be nimble going forward into the future, since we didn't know exactly what that future was going to hold. At the end of 2020, we created an anti-racism task force that then made its recommendations at the very beginning of the year. That work is ongoing. Some of the initiatives have already been completed with our podcast series and some other things, but there's plenty of work still to do, and we continue to work towards that. We had a focus this year on small colleges and universities, and we did a number of different initiatives around that. A symposium in April, a special edition of our Connections magazine that focused on that topic, as well as numerous webinars and roundtables virtually to connect people with similar circumstances on their campuses for as much support as we could provide. We also focused on live-in staff. We had a symposium for them as well in the spring, and we've created a new network, or will be creating a new network very shortly, that live-in staff can connect with each other around the country and around the world. We had some great partnerships this year with ACHA around some pandemic-related information, and then ACUOI and NERSA. We offered an aspiring directors conference, as well as did some membership bundling for certain institutions. And certainly we did a lot of collaboration and partnership with the regions. Couple of relatively new news that you might have heard about. We have relocated our 2022 annual conference and expo, which will be in person. Was originally going to be in Orlando, Florida, but because of the anti-trans legislation that was passed there, we have relocated that to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So we are hoping that many folks from AIMHO will be able to join us there. And we are also looking to change the format of our annual business meeting and permanently change it. It was always done in connection with our annual conference and expo, but it was done virtually for the past 2 years. And we're proposing to keep it as virtual and move it earlier in the calendar year so that the information is more valid, particularly the financial information, to how we're wrapping up the previous year. My thanks to everybody that volunteered to put this event on, and for any of you that volunteer with ACUOI related activities, my thanks to you, especially in this past 18 months or so, when so much has been going on at home, to also dedicate that time to your professional development and other people's professional development is certainly much appreciated and much thanks. So again, thank you very much for allowing me to spend some time with you, and hope you have a great conference.
Thank you very much, Peter. Appreciate the well wishes. And Peter, actually, this coming Thursday, I have the Anti-Racism Task Force that will be speaking, the 2 chairs. So thank you very much for the teaser as we go for our plenary speakers on Thursday. Look forward to it. Thank you all.
All righty.
I'd now like to welcome to the stage the ACUOI Foundation individual, Mari Strumbum from Colorado State. Come on up to the stage whenever you are ready.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to AIMHO 2021. So I am excited to talk to you a little bit about the ACUOI Foundation. If you are not familiar with that, the foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and the whole purpose of the ACUOI Foundation is to support the mission of ACUOI and to support all of us in the various regions. So they'll provide supporting grants or scholarships to conferences, and these are available to folks from every region, all types of schools, all different backgrounds, all different career stages. Examples of this are during COVID, bridge memberships were offered so that schools could receive full ACUOI benefits at highly reduced rates. The foundation helped to fund the ACUOI NESE study on campus housing, student engagement, and persistence, and lots of other cool things like that. So I'm going to drop into the chat the link to an online silent auction that I've created. Much, much, much thanks to the folks that have already donated items to this silent auction. And I have 2 goals for the conference. One is I would love if everybody who's registered for the conference could donate a minimum of $1. So it's about participation, not necessarily about amount. So if everybody could donate at least $1, and you can do that from the auction site. And then also please bid on the items. So we've got 20 items in the auction right now. I will be accepting more items for the auction through next Wednesday. So you can contact me and let me know if you have items to donate. And let's see if we can do this. I would love for us, my second goal is that we raise $2,000 for the foundation during this conference or this week and next. So join me, please, in being a part of this fundraiser for the Kauai Foundation, because it benefits us all in the work that we do in our housing work. So thanks, Todd, for this time.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So now kind of an extended time where I'm going to be going just through some items real quick. Actually, let me close my office window fast for you hear there and weed with fire. So conferences are a great way for colleagues to reconnect, best practices be shared, and exposure to potential problems on the horizon to be shared. Conferences are also have a cost associated with them, and that is why I need to tell you about some of our corporate partners. I'd like to tell you about Folio Furniture. Folio Furniture stepped up this year to act as the exclusive sponsor for the conference and paid the registration cost for every person that is on this call. Let me tell you a little bit about Folio. Folio Furniture provides quality furnishings for the hospitality and education and housing communities. With nearly 30 years of manufacturing experience and having delivered more than 1 million rooms in hotels, resorts, universities, and colleges throughout North America, their achievements speak volumes about Folio's credibility and capabilities. Folio experienced teams of woodworking and machinery experts is composed of some of the industry's best and well-known furniture specialists. They're committed to producing furniture using innovative technologies and distinctive aesthetics without compromising the strength and durability needed to endure the demands of the contract environment. For us in the West, we also have many reasons to go to Las Vegas, and to tour Folio's warehouse needs to be one of them. AIMHO thanks the entire Folio team and glad to have George, Aaron, Andrew, and Ashley in the audience. I also want to highlight Southwest Contract and their sponsorship of the Pre-Conference Development Institutes, AIMHO College, Mid-Level, Symposium, and Senior Housing Officers Institute. Southwest Contract has been exclusively serving the college and university market for 30 years. They pride themselves in being dedicated to the flexibility in design, manufacturing excellence, on-time delivery, and superior customer service. They better understand your students' environmental needs and best building furniture that is both durable and aesthetically desirable. Southwest Contract believes in the creation of the environment within student housing, taking pride in the creating room environments that offer the students the opportunity for flexibility, versatility, space savings, and safety in a home-like atmosphere. The goal of every project is to always meet the desires and requirements of the students as an exceptional value within budget and on time. Southwest Contract is the educational institutional cooperative contract holder for the Residence Hall furniture through 2024. Thank you to the entire Southwest Contract team and for Lee and Trey who are in the audience. I also ask the audience members to remember the Corporate Partner Fair on November 1st and 10th from 12 p.m. through 1 p.m. You will meet Platinum sponsor Full Measure. Full Measure enables you to guide your students through pivotal moments, turning them into opportunities for deep, more meaningful engagement. Full Measure campus moving systems are experience make it easy for students to schedule key appointments and move-in times, access relevant resources, and track next steps, all from their smartphones. You may not want to hear this, but it's less than 250 days away until fall move-in 2022, so find Full Measure for your help. We're glad to have Chris in the audience from Full Measure and look forward to interacting with you at the booth. We also have Court Furniture, who is a silver sponsor, and Savoy Furniture, who is a bronze sponsor at the fair, so please do not forget to stop by. Admittedly, I got to glance up every now and again at the comments just to make sure everything's still going correctly. Okay. So now just a few more words. So change begins with us. 1 year ago, I stood on the virtual stage of Hop-In and made this statement as the center point for the next year as the AIMHO president. There have been times I made this statement to the leadership team of AIMHO as we were discussing work in the communities, and many times I made this statement to myself as I was placing yet another resident in COVID isolation. Change does begin with us, and I would like to highlight some items from this past year in AIMHO as change did begin with us. During the months of February, March, and April, AIMHO held 3 consecutive months of open dialogue sessions. Each of these sessions were recorded and posted to the AIMHO YouTube site, and 3 themes remained consistent. Theme 1, what does the budget look like for your housing at this point? AIMHO members shared stories of budget shortfalls ranging from 5 to 8 digits as the world was still in the grips of COVID. Occupancy was down at schools and the lack of revenue was hurting every school. In the fall of 2021, there may have been a brief relief to some of the schools with higher occupancy, and some schools in the fall of 2021 caused a deeper occupancy divide. Theme 2, how are you checking on your students because COVID is causing us all worry? There was housing locations which were converted to singles. Residence halls were empty for quarantine or isolation spaces, and halls were filled with residents who had to observe strict no guest policies. I think these residents reflected the loneliness of our field, since we were the boots in the dirt type of people forced to use electronic communications and wishing to hold large-scale events again just to be around our students and each other. Many schools are still navigating a difficult path with residents who've been online for 2 years, high school or university, and are now socially struggling. And finally, theme 3, how is your staff doing? Stories of furloughs, staff shortages, and staff fully leaving the field were very present. The definition of empathy is the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing within the frame of the reference, the capacity to place oneself in another position. We empathize with each and many of those who have staffing shortages and many that have disappeared. Many in the AIMHO region and across the globe are at a critical crossroads that began in the past but does not appear to be finished. The crossroads have facilities departments short-staffed, occupancy teams searching for staff, and residential education teams trying to backfill many roles. I implore you to really take to heart our keynote speech today, as well as attend the sessions about staffing during this conference. In June, we had Dr. Cynthia Alcantar joined us from the Forum of Hispanic Serving Institutions. AIMHO already possesses Hispanic Service Institutions and emerging HSIs, which is the demographic that is currently 19% of the U.S. population and expected to continue on an upward trajectory. Dr. Alcantar discussed how many universities and colleges can better equip our halls to be welcoming locations and embrace our changing demographics. Some of the recommendations of cultural centers and dedicated staffing groups are being implemented daily as many AIMHO schools. Thanks again to Angela Bradley for recommending Dr. Alcantar to speak with us. As our halls began to open in August, some schools found that the residents returned in force, and some were still lagging. What cannot be denied is that COVID still has a seat at every table, in every school, and at every event we hold. AIMHO in the world still operates in a what-if style type of leadership that does not appear to be going away soon. But life is not only doom and gloom. I started this speech with a quick recap of AIMHO events that draw upon many of our fears, but also solutions that we seek. Let's talk about some of the joys of AIMHO. Many dedicated committees and individuals work tirelessly to provide support via groups that were in need. AIMHO leadership added great depth on our website for DEI education. Smaller AIMHO schools had asked for a resource library to draw upon, but their institutions were either too small or staff was difficult to research, were in location they could lack resources and could gain through AIMHO's leadership, responded with data to assist. I highlight these items because change did begin with us. We as a group and organization and a school are showing up each day for our residents. We do not come to this conference because we seek time off. We come because we seek energy and empowerment. The change this week starts to open our eyes and do not end until our heads touch the pillow. Change does begin with us. I'd like to leave you with a quick story. As a group of frogs were traveling through the forest, 2 of them fell into a deep pit. When the frogs crowded around the pit and saw how deep it was, they told the 2 frogs that there was no hope left for them. However, the 2 frogs decided to ignore what the others were saying and proceeded to try to jump out of the pit. Despite their efforts, the group of frogs at the top of the pit were still saying that they should just give up, that they would never make it out. Eventually, one of the frogs took heed at what the others were saying, and he just gave up and quit trying. The other frog continued to jump as hard as he could. Again, the crowd of frogs yelled at the frog to stop the pain and just quit. The frog continued to jump even harder and finally made it out. When the frog got out, the other frog said, "Did you not hear us telling us to stop?" The frog explained to them that he had difficulty hearing, and he thought they were just encouraging him the entire time. More of the story, People's words can have a big effect on our lives. Think about what you say before it comes out of your mouth, but change begins with us. Keep cheering each other up and on. Wish all of you the best during this conference and look forward to interacting with you daily. Thank you for this time, and thank you for electing me as your president. I now turn the time over to the affinity groups. So Mike and Taylor, I welcome you to the stage.
Good morning, AIMHO. Thank you all so much for being here. So excited to join in community with everyone these next 2 weeks. So I'll keep my time short here today. I'm here on behalf of Taylor Dixon, our wonderful DSJ chair, to present a little bit on affinity groups. As you hopefully saw in some email communication this past week, we have about 7 affinity groups and caucuses planned over the next 2 weeks for AIMHO members to join in community and build community across the region, as well as speak about and discuss equity and inclusion throughout the region and throughout the conference. We hope that you look through those groups and see your identities represented. If you don't in any way, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Please don't hesitate if you would like to be anonymous, recognizing that positionality and identity can sometimes affect comfort with that, to fill out our equity and inclusion notification form as well. And we will take a look at that, and we have set aside time to build in additional groups as we need. I want to take a moment to thank Taylor for all of her wonderful work throughout this past year on affinity groups, as well as past chairs, Biko Bloom-Fisher, Becca Lynch, and James Wright, who have done wonderful work making these affinity groups a year-round experience as well. So please, if you don't get a chance to join during the conference, please know that they will continue throughout the year too. And I also want to thank all of our wonderful facilitators for those groups who are volunteering their time to make these spaces as welcoming and as community building as possible. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me throughout the conference or outside the conference if you want to chat at all about equity and inclusion on your home campuses, throughout the region, throughout the conference, any points. I'm here for you. Thank you all so much. And I'm now going to turn it over to Letha to talk about our programming, the rest of our programming schedule.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. That amazing captioning is picking up my words, so I know that you all can hear me. My name is Letha Parrott. I am the 2021 Program Committee Chair. I want to go ahead and speak on behalf of the Programming Committee in saying that we're so happy to see all of y'all. Well, in fairness, we can't see none of y'all at the moment, but we are happy that you're here, okay? Starting tomorrow, we will have 8 concurrent programming sessions that you all can access on Tuesdays and Wednesdays of the conference. Each of those days will have 2 sessions, totaling 8. We, the program committee, tried to compile a list of sessions that covered multiple areas. And thanks to the amazing presenters from this region, we are confident that we have done just that. Some important things to note about the schedule. If you look at the conference schedule, 90 minutes are set aside for each programming time block. Only 1 hour of that will be actually for the presentation. The other 30 minutes is to give intentional time for 2 things. First, technical difficulties. Although we don't want to run into any issues, we know that they sometimes happen, and we want to give the presenters enough time to work through them without stress. Sorry if you can hear my dog. He likes to join all my video chats. Second, let's call it self-care. We want you to take intentional time to reflect on the session that you just witnessed, meet other AIMHO professionals using the networking tool found on the navigation panel to the left of the screen, or just take a screen break. If your boss thinks that you're still in AIMHO, take a real break. Like, get a pillow and a blanket and get on your floor. I mean, everybody needs a nap every once in a while. Lastly, at the end of each programming session, you will be asked to submit an evaluation on what you experienced. The programming committee will use these evaluations to award our top 6 programs and the best of AIMHO. The session that is chosen as Best of AIMHO will go on to represent the region at the ACUHO I conference. So when you see either your presenter or your program assistant nagging you about putting in an evaluation, please, please, please do so. If you have any questions, we've been sending out emails. You can email myself, Letha Parrott, or Allison Colvin, and we'll be sure to get right back to you. Thanks. I'm turning it back over to Todd. Sure. Bye.
I don't know if I want the microphone back because I've been reading the closed captioning and now I can see I will send my speech out, but I'm hopefully my accent was definitely picked up and I'd like to see what was said. All right. So highlighting some booths and the displays. I encourage you to take a look around, look within the expo, visit our corporate partners, but also take a look at the history of AIMHO. Take a look at, sorry, I'm reading the closed caption. Take a look around the system and see the different items that we have to offer. Make sure to stop by the ACUHO Foundation booth. And with that, I will step off the stage and I'll allow Brian or Michelle to come up and have them introduce our keynote speaker. So while we wait for Brian to come in, I just recognize that the booths, they will not be serving booze as the closed caption says. So you do not get booze at the corporate partner sessions. You could, if you though, do go to the ACUHO Foundation and see some of the donations. There may be some high quality booze that's been donated that that's going to be auctioned off to raise funds. So I would encourage you to go to Mari's, take a look at the ACUHO Foundations and see. There's 20 things thus far, or if you want to donate more.
I'm hoping folks can hear me because I cannot hear anyone. So if I can just get a thumbs up in the chat, if folks can hear me. Perfect, perfect. Well, it is my privilege and my honor to be able to introduce today's keynote speaker for our conference. As you continue to think about the conference theme of professional peaks and virtual valleys, I challenge you to continue to think of ways in which we can continue to evolve and continue to change. Many conversations right now in our field have been about the Great Resignation. I challenge us to think about what is the great realization of what is happening in our country, what is happening in our world that influences and ignites a change in us that needs to push our profession forward. Hopefully you will see today in the keynote speaker that we have chosen some enlightened things for us and some challenges as we think about the work that we do. Takeda Bankhead is an accomplished scholar practitioner with a myriad of professional experiences that hold student success, innovation, and inclusive excellence at their core. She currently serves as the Executive Director for Support Programs within the Division of Access, Diversity, and Inclusion at Mississippi State University. In her role, she serves as the Director of TRIO Student Support Services and provides administrative oversight for the Thrive Scholars Program and the Promise Student Support Program. Prior to her appointment at Mississippi State, Takeda served in a variety of functional areas at Old Dominion University and the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, including Housing and Residence Life, Black Cultural Centers, and the Counseling Center, where she pioneered a bevy of groundbreaking initiatives to enhance the overall student experience. Takeda is a noted speaker, instructor, and facilitator who delivers innovative educational workshops designed to tackle complex issues of inclusive leadership, cultural humility, wellness, and identity. Her experiences have also positioned her as highly sought consultant within the field for program development, supporting historically marginalized students, mental health, holistic wellness, dialogic learning, assessment, and student engagement. Takeda is a native of the friendly city of Columbus, Mississippi. She holds an MS in Counselor Education and Student Affairs Administration from Mississippi State University and is a registered nurse with a Bachelor of Science in Nursing from Mississippi University for Women. Takeda has been recognized locally and nationally for her scholarly contribution, civic engagement, and educational outreach initiatives. Most notably, she was honored as one of the 2018 Central Illinois Business Magazine's 40 Under 40 recipients for her exemplary professional endeavors. Takeda is also a lover of all things Black and is a vocal proponent of the specific empowerment of all Black women. She is the creator and editor-in-chief of the Pedestal Project, LLC, an online space and organization dedicated to uplifting Black women through creative writing. To learn more about the Pedestal Project, please visit pedestalproject.com and connect on social media at Pedestal Project. In her spare time, she enjoys being a community servant as an active member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and spending time with her family and friends. I'm so excited to have Takeda with us here today, coming in from Mississippi. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and turn the stage over to Takeda Bankhead. AIMHO, please join me in welcoming Takeda.
Hi, everyone. Give me just a second so that we can get all of our tech situated. Okay. How am I able to share my screen? All righty, I think we are just about there. Okay. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Yes? Okay, awesome. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Moffitt, for the wonderful introduction. I hope that you all are able to understand me and hear me correctly. Hear me clearly. So I'm gonna just tap into the chat. I'm glad that we took the captioning off because a Mississippi girl and closed captions typically don't really work that well together. So again, thank you all for joining me. I am coming to you all from the sometimes great state of Mississippi. I've recently relocated here in the last couple of months, as you probably heard from my bio. And like many of us this past year, I've really been forced to reprioritize some components of both my personal and professional life. And so that has led me back home. I must say that calling this entire thing an adjustment is probably the understatement of the year. But I also think that I'm faithful, that I'm planted exactly where I'm supposed to be. And I always find gratitude in specific moments where I get to share space with other individuals. So I say that to say that I'm really grateful to share space with you all. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about what my kind of perspectives are about where we are as a field, where I think we have an obligation to go and to take our students and also our staff. I really hope that you gain something from this. I hope that you are not necessarily looking for answers, because I don't think that I have the answers for you, but I hope that by the end of this, I will give you the tools to be able to ask the right questions in order to begin the reflective work that we've alluded to all morning thus far. So again, kind of going a little bit into what perspective I'm taking for today. Talking about my readjustment to Mississippi, I think that there's something beautiful about when you leave a place or leave a situation and then you come back with fresh eyes. There is something about having a renewed perspective that allows you to see things that you may not have seen, at least in the same way before. And so if we think back to the past 18 months or so, a lot of us are having a forcibly renewed perspective about what we're looking at our field, what we're looking at as a profession, what we're looking at as professionals, and how we might be able to kind of lead ourselves in a journey about what it means to see our field differently and what it's become as we move forward from our virtual valleys and into our professional peaks. So before we start, I usually do this in person, but it's kind of weird to do in a virtual setting. So please just humor me. I want you all to join me in a few deep breaths. Okay. So we're going to breathe in for 4 and we're going to breathe out for 8. So on my count, I'll lead us in a breath and then we'll do a few of those. Okay. On 3. 1, 2, 3. We're going to breathe in. Let's do one more. And then one last breath. Now, what I have found in a lesson that I'm grateful for after all of these pandemics is the ability to breathe. I think that that is a tool that I use whenever I need to establish a sense of safety and infuse a level of stillness into a moment. I remind myself to breathe. And as many of you likely know, this is one of the simplest yet one of the most powerful tools that we can utilize to bring ourselves out of the spiral that our brains are moving us through from day to day and truly step back into the fullness and intentionality of our present moment. We have to remember that as we've been carrying this field forward, as we've been just doing and running and going, we have to pause to just breathe. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into the presentation. So for our community agreements, I wanted to just make sure that we're all on the same accord, making sure that honesty, vulnerability, and accountability are equally welcomed and respected in this space. I will try my best to be as objective, but there may be some moments where what I say will probably bring up some painful memories over the past couple of months or past couple of years for some of us. Feel free at any point to share experiences in the chat box or at any time throughout the presentation. Again, this is much easier when we're in person. So I love any type of affirmations or reactions in the chat box. So please continue to do that throughout the presentation. It will not distract me at all. And then also for some of the points that we'll bring up, challenge yourself to really reflect honestly before you necessarily react or seek a method of defense. So I will start and just kind of share a very transparent moment of vulnerability. So when Dr. Moffitt first reached out to me about doing the keynote, he gave me the very specific instruction that he wanted to shake people. Now, if you know Dr. Moffitt, that's his approach to a few things. That he's like, I want the people to be shaken. I want them to really be moved and think about what we really need to think about critically as a profession. And just so you all know, I've gotten the reputation of being a very direct, tell it like it is type of person. I'm the person who in the staff meeting will ask the questions that no one else is afraid to ask, but then my colleagues will email me afterward and tell me that they agree with me. I don't sugarcoat things. I don't necessarily beat around the bush, and I hate it when people are anything but direct with me. So partly, I think I owe a bit of that to all of the Black Southern women before me who had to ensure that they weren't trampled on in every sense of the word. And then I think another part of that just kind of comes from this obligation to make sure that any trampling stops with me. So that just kind of gives you a little bit of a sense of how I approach my work. And I think I've just adopted this sense of duty. So pre-pandemic, Takeda probably would have come in and been ready to kind of really shake things up and not think twice about it. But to be completely honest, I think not necessarily post-pandemic, Takeda has been quite shaken by the multiple pandemics that are happening and the way that each of my identities has been uniquely impacted. And I would venture to say that I know that in the group that we have today, I'm not necessarily alone in what that has felt like. And so thinking back to what has been this stream of never-ending loss, this barrage of questions that we've been getting, that we've asked to others that really don't have clean, pretty, clear-cut answers. This fear, this perpetual fear of contracting COVID. For some of us like me who actually did contract COVID, revamping every single program you have planned and spent your entire time laying out, or having to scrap plans for your programs altogether, canceling your conferences, canceling your study abroad trips, losing people that you love, whether it's from the field or in the very sense of the mortal realm, people who are dying, people who everywhere you look, there's some level of sadness that we can't seem to get away from. And we've been expected to continue to push on. Having to start new jobs in a pandemic, not one, but two, that was my reality. And trust me, those were not my favorite moments in higher education, all while watching people who look like you be murdered on your TV screens. You're watching people go missing who no one else is looking for, people who look like you, people who remind you of your children, people who remind you of your inner child, and what it was like to see this blatant disregard for your humanity. Wanting to feel some shift to normalcy, while little by little we have to accept the grim reality that normal is now a thing of the past. Think about how much has been thrown at us as a field, and think about how much we've been asked to juggle. If we all took a moment to pause and really think about what has occurred, and if we really truly sat with it, I think we would all really realize that we are not okay. Many of us are likely a lot more wounded than we've had the time or the space to process. And we have been forced to heal ourselves with bare, overworked, and empty hands. And so I don't want to paint this picture as if we're in this desperate state, but I do also want to call attention to the fact of the reality of what we've been asked to carry as professionals, especially as professionals within housing. So I have a question, and I want you all to be extremely honest with me, or as honest as you feel comfortable being in a virtual, non-private space. I want to invite you to reflect on how clearly can you remember your last pre-pandemic workday? And to clarify, this is before the emails started circulating in our inboxes about what this mysterious threat might be, and that we shouldn't be alarmed. Before we even entertained ideas of masks or lockdowns or spring break, what do you remember clearly about your last pre-pandemic workday? And I'll give you all a moment to think about that and share some thoughts in the chat. Seeing some people, yeah, it felt like a lifetime ago. Are any of you having trouble remembering what that day was like? Oh, you're in Italy. Oh, wow. So I'm seeing a lot of yeses that in everything that has happened, that last pre-pandemic workday probably feels like a bit of a blur. You may have a couple of spots here and there, but what we've experienced has completely overrun what we were even used to being our normal. So lots of people who were at least engaging in some things that were right before we heard of the threat, but there's a level of difficulty having to recall what our existence in our normal was like before we had to experience all of these things. And so I asked that because I think it helps call attention to when you're in go mode, you hardly ever get a chance to stop and really realize what trauma you are literally buried in. And so want to spend just a brief moment to kind of dig a little bit deeper and kind of veil this as my general observation. Our field is in a state of emergency while we're also in a state of denial. I think that we have clung to the sense of how we've done things for so long that we have not realized that we are operating in optimal crisis mode. Now, for our people who actually, are used to being in crisis mode, similar to housing professionals, dean of students, anyone who, mental health professionals, crisis mode is not a foreign territory for you. But what has happened to all of us is that we've dealt with this unique combination of trauma that feels very different right now. So very generally speaking, when we talk about trauma, I think trauma, for what we know it mostly in our field, or at least had most commonly referred to it prior to the pandemics, was just acute trauma. But if we look at the combinations of how the American Psychological Association defines trauma, what's very different about this time is we're not just experiencing one of these types of trauma, we are legitimately experiencing all of them all at once. And so if we're thinking about acute trauma, that occurs after one single stressful event. So I usually just call this short trauma so that you can help understand it. Chronic trauma is repeated, prolonged exposure to highly stressful events. This also plays really well into a lot of the literature around generational trauma that we talk about. Complex trauma, exposure to multiple traumatic events at a time. And then when we're thinking in the social justice realm, vicarious trauma is a much more commonly known trauma that we refer to more recently. And it's just a secondary trauma that involves experiencing some type of emotional response to a traumatic event that's happening to someone else, but you've been in close contact with that person. And so what did this pandemic do to us? Out of the blue, it slapped us in the face with all of these traumas all at once. Some of those are happening to us, but many of which are happening to so many other people around us. Now, make no mistake, many of these traumatizing events are not new. They are being seen in a new lens, in a new context because of these multiple pandemics. And this type of trauma experienced in this very specific way requires new solutions. I want you to reflect back on a time, and I'll preface by saying this was my observation again. When we, right after that last clear pre-pandemic day, there was a very, very brief moment of unity, unlike any period that I think I had ever witnessed in my lifetime. Now, granted, I'm only in my early 30s, but very unique sense of we are all in this together. And what very quickly changed as we got more information about what was happening around the world, we got more information about COVID, we realized that we were only in this together until we realized that we were not at an equal risk of harm. And so if you'll recall, you know, I remember on being social media, I was scrolling and there were these times where, you know, there wasn't much preliminary data. You know, there were some people who seemed to not be at risk of contracting COVID. But it was like, we're fine. Let's just all be cautious. Let's all look out for one another. And let's just enact this sense of community care. Very quickly, that went out the window when we saw that some of the most marginalized among us were the ones who were most at risk. So the elderly, people of color, specifically thinking about Black people, people with underlying conditions who are probably already burdened by a broken healthcare and insurance system, people in rural areas. These were the folks who our economy had already deemed as disposable. So once we realized that those were the only people who were truly at risk, unity went out of the window. And there were no more campaigns to be all in this together. It was like, well, figure it out. You're in this on your own, almost as if we had caused a lot of these things to happen. And so this honestly is a glaring parallel to what I feel like happened in our field. When no one knew anything, there was a much greater sense of wanting to band together to get answers in a unified way, to get solutions. But as soon as we saw which people were a bit more at risk, some of our old habits began to creep up. We were thinking about, okay, we can be flexible, but not too flexible with work schedules. Okay, we'll accommodate parents and caregivers in a way that we probably didn't do before, but now, what about your office time? How can you be productive? Narratives quickly shifted once we realized that the folks who were essential were no longer regarded in a way that actually valued them being essential. It became about keeping operations running smoothly. It became about minimizing our funding and minimizing any money lost by our institutions. And then it slowly became declarations of where your politics landed you and who, not only the world, but the field was okay with letting go. And so I think that this was the moment in our field where our facade began to crack. And this is where we began to show each other and ourselves for who our true priorities were. So not the priorities that we say in ACPA or NASPA or in a AIMHO, but we revealed our true priorities for maintaining those imbalanced systems of power, or thinking about how we can maintain these rigid traditions that have not always served all of our students or all of our staff members. This is when we gradually rewarded our essential employees with more work and less support and less flexible leave, because we said that we want you to risk your health during these most uncertain times because you need to be here. You're essential, but you're so essential that we don't care if you are put in harm's way. Now, that probably seems like an oversimplification, and I'm sure that there's a level of nuance that, of course, you have to consider with every institutional makeup. But the glaring overarching picture is that we were not truly operating in an era of care for our essential workers, especially in our housing, dining workers, custodial staff, anyone who was absolutely necessary for our institutions to run. They were not treated with the level of care and are still not being treated with the level of care that they deserve. And what we have to ask ourselves as a field, why did it take a crisis for us to realize that these are some of the main threads that are holding our campus together? Why did it take a crisis for us to deem them essential? And why have we not reckoned with what it means to really nurture our essential employees? So what happens when your most essential employees are hanging on by a thread? So I want you to think about it this way, right? Have you ever had your favorite shirt or sweater or some type of clothing that you repeatedly wear over and over, right? One day you notice this loose thread and there's a quick moment where you have to make a split decision and you decide, are you going to pull this thread for a cleaner look or should you just leave it even though it's getting on your nerves? I think we know all too well that when that happens, when you take the chance and pull that thread, the thread rarely breaks cleanly. If you yank at it, things start to unravel and you're left with this hole that continues to get bigger and bigger no matter what you do. That hole eventually damages the whole look of your favorite item and you realize that it might be time to toss it. Now, is that every piece of fabric sorted story? No. Sometimes you have scissors handy and you can make a clean cut, but then you know what happens then? You find another loose thread somewhere else. And if you're the sewing type, which I'm not, you might be able to fix it. You might be able to make it look the way that it did, even though the original integrity has been altered in some way. It's not unusable. It's probably not even less desirable and just as fashionable. And it's not even less valuable, but it's just not quite the same from the day that you first got it and that you first fell in love with it. You could choose to throw it away, or you could choose to find a new way to use this piece that you've loved so much. So in a sense, our professional stories can be thought of in a similar way. We have probably found a couple of loose threads. Some of us are hanging by a thread. And this is the point where we're thinking about, how do we address that? Do we want to yank it and risk unraveling everything? Do we want to try to cut away at it cleanly, knowing that we still might lose some of the original integrity? Or do we just think about how to reuse it in a new way? And so one of those things that I want you to take a moment and think about is the main threads of why you joined the field. What brought you to the field of higher education, and specifically what brought you into housing? So I'd love for you to share some of those answers into the chat. What brought you to the field of higher education, and what brought you into the functional area of housing? Can you remember your main why for doing this work? And would you say that that is what has kept you here? Okay. Seeing some great responses in the chat. Thank you all. And for those who are sharing or even reflecting to yourself, do you feel like that is what has still kept you here, especially now? Seems that. Awesome. Please continue to share those. Thank you so much. So Dr. Moffitt alluded to this a little bit in our introduction, and I can just tell from the schedule that we will be touching on bits and pieces of what we'll be talking about. And I'll also be talking about this a lot more in my workshop. The Great Resignation. We've heard this buzzing around, mostly not just for our field, but just the entire American workforce in general, that people are leaving the field in droves. And I can just give a personal example that within my 2.5 or so months of being within this new role, I'm currently hiring for 5 people out of my 7 available positions. Now, there have been multiple different reasons for why, people are leaving, and some things are personal, some things are just a matter of timing. But what I'm experiencing, I know is not unique to everyone else. And so I've seen some articles recently that have talked about, is this the Great Resignation or is this a Great Awakening? And I heard it referred to as a great realization also as well. And so I want you to kind of share in the chat if you know someone who has completely left the field altogether. You don't have to say who. We don't want to out people. But if you know someone who has left the field altogether, or you also don't have to share this part, but you can if you're comfortable, if you've considered leaving the field as well. So if you know people who have left the field, or if you feel comfortable sharing whether you've considered leaving the field as well. And as folks think about that, I just want to kind of also reiterate, yes and yes, several people have left. All right, so I see that come quite in. I think I've probably seen the greatest drove of people leaving probably within the last 6 months. And I do think that as we talk a lot more about reframing this Great Resignation, it is important to think about that it is not about people not wanting to work. I think what is happening is that people are, reprioritizing not only their needs as an employee, but their needs as a human. Folks are waking up and realizing that mistreatment is no longer worth it. The time to start being honest about where we fall short in our supervision practices and in building a community of care for staff just as much, if not more, for our students is now. The work-life integration and the self-care that we've lied about at every conference, I'm just going to be real, we've lied about it. We're demanding it now. And those other duties as assigned that are in our positions, we're requiring equitable pay for those things now. The pay that institutions are likely saving by exploiting competent professionals under the guise of opportunity and professional development, these are the things that we're starting to really be more vocal and more stringent on now. So to be clear, no one's decision to leave is or stay is not some type of survival of the fittest exercise or a testament to who truly cares about the students. I don't think that is the case at all. I respect the people who have left. I respect the people who have stayed, both equally. But I think it's a shining example that not everyone, that everyone is not or maybe cannot get what they need from this field anymore. And here's where we have to turn the mirror on ourselves as a field and ask ourselves, what changes can we really make to be who we say we are and give new professionals and graduate students an honest depiction of the work that they will realistically do in this field? I have had in this past week, 4 conversations. So last week, 4 conversations with graduate students who are very disillusioned with the field. And all of them were graduate students of color. So I think that that's helpful context, but very disillusioned with the field. And what I always share with graduate mentees is that from my perspective, your first professional job will be one of your hardest. And the reason for that is that I think a lot of our graduate programs give our students one sense of what to expect from our field. But I think when students enter the field as a professional at their respective institutions, they are shocked because they are not getting the field that we taught them about. And part of that is just due to different types of people, different experiences. But a lot of that is due to the infrastructure that we've built that still relies heavily on power and oppression and othering. And we have to be honest about how we have, in some ways, been complicit in maintaining a field that does not welcome the type of people who can really push it forward at all spaces. For those folks who do manage to get into those spaces, a lot of times they don't feel safe, they don't feel heard, they don't feel valued. And so we're seeing that partially play out in people exiting the field altogether. But we're also seeing that play out in some of the mental health challenges that our staff members are becoming much more vocal about, and that we are also making a more active attempt at capturing in the data. So we have an opportunity now to do away with some of those things, and we have to ask ourselves, what are the things that we're willing to risk losing in order to change this field for the next generation of professionals? How will we repurpose this field to be more durable, but just as endearing for them? So the warm fuzzies that we felt before we saw the reality of what this field could do to some of us, how do we get that back? So as we decide to repurpose our institutional fabric, I think it's important for us to be honest about what's simply not working anymore. What hard truths did the pandemic teach us? I think one of the things is that, again, like I mentioned, we have to be honest about our shortcomings as a field and our collective reluctance to explicitly call those things out. We can no longer afford to beat around the bush as a field. I think we do the world, our students, and ourselves a disservice when we give thinly veiled, vague statements to responses of incidents that are causing real harm on our campuses. I don't know where the template for email statements and open letters came from, but it does nothing to address the real harms. Mostly, I won't say everyone, but mostly they do nothing to address the real harm that is happening on our campus without action behind it. We have to be honest about what our students are experiencing. Every ugly thing that has popped up in our field, whether it's from academia, from housing, we have to be okay with knowing that in some ways, we have been a part of the harm that has pushed people out of the field. We have been reactionary in a lot of ways as opposed to being proactive. We have sometimes relied on the rigidity and the inherent laziness of clinging to tradition when we could have been embracing innovation earlier, before a crisis, in a way that wasn't performative. We have an over-reliance on our students leading the advocacy work at our respective institutions. Historically, our college campuses have been a common location for student organizers and protesters. Many of the most pivotal parts of our field and the spaces that have been most impactful for our students have come as a result of student protests. If we're looking at our cultural centers, if we're looking at our women's centers and in similar places, most of those were not created just because someone wanted to better serve students. They were created as a response to student protest. When students are protesting these multiple injustices that have been amplified nationally from the multiple pandemics, they are also speaking up about injustice on campus in a way that has become somewhat detrimental to their overall experience. So when we're thinking about discrimination, sexual assault, campus policing, our students are fed up in a new way that they are not able to focus fully on their college experience because the ways that this has interrupted their studies and also their psyche are continuing to call on us to make a more urgent solution for that. Many times our students are not bringing us concerns that are new. I've had students that will bring things that have been a repeated issue. If you just look at yearbooks or look at archives, these are not new concerns that they're bringing to us. So what then is our excuse for not correcting the problem? Even now, there are several protests at several HBCUs around, like I'm thinking about Tuskegee, Howard University, about inadequate funding for programming and facilities. And these funding allocations aren't new. We always knew that there wasn't enough for the work that we really need to be doing. Why are we more worried about managing media blowouts than making proactive changes to the infrastructures of our institutions? And so I know for everyone at every level, we don't necessarily have that power, but we all have the power of our voice to ask those questions. And at some point, it comes to a point of what am I willing to risk in order to build a better future for our students? And at what point does that counteract with what I'm willing to, how I'm willing to serve my students? So these things should be born out of a desire to genuinely think about how we can be better serving our students in a sustainable and equitable way. As a field, I think that one of the most glaring things I've seen is that as much as we say that we care about our staff members, we don't. And here's why. The way that we paint self-care and work-life integration is inconsistent. We will give messages around self-care without a realistic reduction of the workload. And so we'll tell you to unplug, but to also be available. What message does that send to someone who really needs to take a moment to be still? And though, of course, our wellness and our priority is always our ultimate responsibility, there have to be mechanisms in place that make a space for us to be able to do that without a risk of punishment, without a risk of loss of compensation, and without a risk of being seen as a less worthy professional who won't be granted the same opportunities for advancement or growth. So if we really want to think about minimizing the burnout of our teams, how can we reimagine how our work is really done? I think one of the great things about that we all will talk about is the virtual world and how it has given us such a greater level of flexibility. But now for some of our campuses where we are transitioning back to in-person or have already transitioned, sometimes some people haven't gone back to virtual. Some people have done some things that are hybrid. And the reality is that having to kind of operate in two different settings has, by nature of design, doubled a lot of our work. And so how are we thinking about ways to do work differently? How are we being honest about our workloads? How are we being receptive to our employees when they're sharing that? And what types of things are we holding on to that don't really have true value for the directions of our institutions? As a field, we don't always put our money where our mouth is. So if you're like me and you just perpetually stay on higher ed jobs just for funsies, I can't count how many DEI positions that I've seen that have been created as a response to the multiple pandemics that are happening. But I would also encourage you to reach out to these people who are taking on these roles as the first and the onlys and ask them what the financial support from their respective institutions has looked like beyond the job posting. We are hiring DEI professionals to transform these campuses, but we are not providing them the adequate staffing, training, or pay to undo more than a century of problematic academic systems. We are ignoring the turnover of staff members with historically marginalized identities because many of them have been forced to be DEI professionals, some formally and some informally, simply because of their lived experiences. This also further perpetuates this othering of these individuals in our field and accelerates this burnout of those who added so much value and diversity to that institutional fabric. And then finally, exhausted professionals simply can't do good work, and it's not their fault. I think this one's pretty self-explanatory, and we all just have to do better, period. Better with resting, better with allowing people to rest, better with being honest about where we truly are and when we're not okay. And so as I leave you, these are the questions that I think are really helpful in beginning to reflect on how we can repurpose our institutional fabric in a meaningful way. Think about what made our field unique and valuable in its original design and how much of that truly remains. How much of the field's integrity will we lose if we don't change now? So when we're thinking about that original piece of fabric with holes, repairs, whatever, how much of that will we lose if we don't make urgent, decisive, and explicit changes right now? How can we keep the original value and intent of our field with a new design that still maintains our purpose? How impactful could we be if we genuinely embodied the ideas that we're teaching our students? And then if we think a bit more personally, from an interpersonal perspective, what does the current state of our field say about us as humans? Are we making humanity a central piece of our goal? And if the field in its current and or future iterations no longer fits you, are you okay with walking away? I know in light of us leaving people and folks leaving the field, that may not feel like a popular or comfortable thought. But the reality is that if we are truly prioritizing wellness in all senses, a departure might also be the best solution, and that is 100% okay. And so I hope that in my discussion that I've given you something to think about. I will be doing a workshop later to talk a bit more deeply about burnout and mitigating those harmful effects of burnout for housing professionals. And so I think I will end now and leave time for questions, but I wanted to and also for things in the chat. So thank you all so much. I have really enjoyed sharing space with you all, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Takeda. We'll go ahead and open the floor for any questions that folks might have. You can feel free to use the Q&A option under stage and we can answer them there, or you can just drop them in the chat and we'll try and follow them as best as possible.
Thank you all.
Lots of gratitude, Takeda.
Well, thank you. I hope it really resonated, but I see lots of hand claps, so thank you.
Awesome. Well, folks can continue to, if you want to continue to drop questions, Takeda has shared contact information here on the slide. And Takeda will also be doing a programming session next week to provide that additional workshop, part of it being a continuation of this conversation. Takeda, thank you so much for coming and bringing a wealth of knowledge to us and challenging us to think about some of the things that we should be thinking about every day in a different way. This session has been very calming for me, at least, and I think that's your presence and the attitude that you bring into the work that you do. And so thank you for continuing to push this conversation forward and contributing to our field. I will go ahead and turn the conversation now over to Todd to get us started with our state meetings.
Thank you very much once again, Takeda. Truly appreciate it. Very powerful words. Need to be many things, need to be said, and many things. We're going to continue the conversation, so thank you very much once again. So for state meetings, you'll actually be able to step away, go in within the sessions, step in. It should be starting here in the next couple of minutes. Your state representatives are in those spaces. Please take the time to exit here and head on to the next part of the sessions. Appreciate you, and I'll see you soon.